President Trump has set a deadline for Hamas to disarm or be destroyed, while moderating his tone on Iran, adding that despite the strikes against terrorist organizations in the Gaza Strip in Gaza and Lebanon, and despite the tensions with Iran, there is peace in the Middle East. And at the same time, Israel's intelligence echelon assesses that the United States military is already set for a massive strike on Iran if they are ordered to do so. And more forces are still arriving into this region. With each passing day, more preparations are made, more firepower arrives, and the blow that can be struck against the Ayatollah regime gets stronger. But why are the Gulf states afraid of a rapid collapse of a regime in Tehran and working to prevent an American attack on Iran? Welcome to Boots on the Ground. I'm your host, Yair Pinto, and this is the just before the weekend edition, bringing you the full truth about what is happening in Israel. So President Trump is keeping his cards close to his chest and continues to reinforcing the American military forces in the Middle East after declaring that Iran will be wiped off the face of the earth if they make a wrong move. He also said that he hopes there will not be additional military action, but lamented that they are shooting people in the streets indiscriminately. To that point, horrific testimonies about the scale of the regime violence against protesters in recent weeks continue to emerge, including an official update from the regime itself that 3,117 fatalities occurred, but according to human rights organizations, the real number is in the tens of thousands. For their part, the regime has warned that any harm to the supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei will be considered a declaration of war on Islam worldwide and will lead to a broad war on multiple fronts. To this absurd statement, President Trump said that Iran is no longer the neighborhood bully in the Middle East, and that the United States is moments away from wiping out the Revolutionary Guards in Iran. However, here in Israel, we also have to worry about Iran's proxy forces, and that includes the Houthis in Yemen, which have been observed preparing an attack against Israel. In the northern arena, there is of course also a threat from Lebanon and Syria, and the IDF has been hitting Hezbollah targets in both countries this week, including border crossings that are used for smuggling weapons and other contraband. In addition, the IDF also carried out a wave of strikes in Gaza, including 15 targets in 40 minutes on Wednesday, in response to violations of the ceasefire agreement by Hamas, the terrorist organization that controls Gaza. We'll also talk about the diplomatic link to moving to Phase B in the ceasefire plan, as President Trump issued statements this week that describe his vision for the near future in the Middle East, saying that Hamas agreed to disarm, even though its people were born with a rifle in their hands. However, if Hamas does not disarm, we will blow them up. Apparently, within about 3 weeks, it will become clear whether he will indeed do so. If not, the IDF will be forced to enter the Gaza Strip with the full force and finish the job. Targeting the terrorist organization Hezbollah, Trump called them small flames and said if they cause problems, the IDF will crush them. And meanwhile, in the Peace Council that will take care of the Gaza Strip, Europe is out, Putin is in, and we will bring you all the details. And elsewhere, the United States Treasury Department announced that Hamas operates a network of civilian charities in the United States of America as a cover for terror financing, and a Saudi report about Hamas leaders preparing to leave the Gaza Strip sparked reactions amongst Gaza's residents, who on the one hand hope that Hamas terrorists will leave and not return, but are also angry. So we have a lot to speak about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your Boots on the Ground report. This is the weekend edition, bringing you the full truth about what's happening in Israel on day 839 of the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shia militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in this region, taking their orders from the Revolutionary Guards in Iran, which is the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. And a moment before we begin, I need to remind you that we are at a very critical moment. The near future will determine whether we are in a world war against extreme Islam or in a world that strives for peace and free trade. So together, let's make sure to spread the truth about what's happening here in Israel, because Israel is the shofar of the peace in this world. So together, share this content, make sure to like the subscribe button, and tell your friends, your neighbors. Never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. Now, let's get into the news, because large American military forces are already deployed here in the Middle East, and more are on their way. This includes dozens of aircraft aboard naval carriers, as well as land bases in Jordan and elsewhere. This is not an exercise, but a serious deployment aimed at one scenario, an attack on Iran, on a significant scale that could trigger a regional chain reaction. However, the more forces America deploys, the more able they will be to contain any fallout from a strike on Iran, and with every day that passes and more forces are in place, the path to pulling the trigger is much shorter. And amidst this American buildup, Israel's intelligence echelon understands that we could enter an all-out campaign in the Middle East that lasts weeks and opens more than one front. They also estimate that the United States military will complete its force buildup for a major strike within a week or two, but even now, it is capable of carrying out a limited-scale strike. However, it is assessed that the Trump administration is taking a go big or go home approach to this problem and will either carry out a massive attack or no attack at all. This will necessarily also include preparations for defending Israel and other United States allies and interests in this region from Iran's likely response. And with that in mind, the Pentagon is not only deploying offensive assets, but defensive assets as well. It includes layers of detection, warning, and interception across the Middle East and the Arabian Peninsula. The goal is clear: to protect their forces, but also global strategic assets, including oil and gas fields, airports and seaports, desalination facilities, and anything else that could, in a sense, become a pressure point on the global economy. While all of this is going on, President Trump is keeping his cards close to his chest, and he signals willingness to go all the way, but avoids publicly nailing down the final objective. Will he try to topple the regime, or merely to damage Iran's military capabilities? Let me know in the comments. But according to accounts from the discussions around him, he's demanding decisive proposals on the one hand, and also he leaves breaking sentences, such as Iran will not be able to be nuclear, and adds, "I hope we won't act." On another night, he sounded completely different, saying, "If they try to harm me, we will wipe them off the face of the earth." But in his language, that is not a hint, but rather a direct warning. Speaking of warnings, President Trump has also told the regime to stop unaliving protesters. And this week, horrific testimonies kept emerging from that country of Iran of brutal tactics by security forces that the regime itself admits to 3,117 fatalities in the last wave of protests, but human rights organizations point to tens of thousands, and President Trump refers to this publicly and says they are shooting people in the streets indiscriminately, and expresses hope that there will not be additional military action. At the same time, the level of pressure on the regime is just rising. And from here, we arrive at the most sensitive point: Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Official statements from the Iranian parliament and from the security system of the Revolutionary Guards warned that harm to Khamenei would be considered a declaration of war and will lead to a religious call for jihad, a holy war, and the mobilization of soldiers of Islam worldwide. This is not an empty slogan. It is an attempt to turn a military strike on one figure into a mechanism that ignites several fronts at once. The operational meaning is clear. If Khamenei is harmed, the IRGC will attempt to activate its proxies, including Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, and the Shia militias in Iraq, to attack American bases in the Middle East as well as American ships in this region. So this might also include a rapid disruption of the Red Sea and even strikes on the shipping and the trade routes. This is a scenario that explains why the Americans are deploying defensive capabilities as well, not only offensive ones. And inside Iran, Khamenei is seen not only as a political leader, but also as a religious authority that embodies the principle of rule of Islamic law. Therefore, any discussion about him immediately becomes a discussion about the identity of the regime. Here, the Gulf states enter the picture because in the Gulf, they are not celebrating. On the contrary, they fear two things at the same time that also clash with one another. On the one hand, they fear an Iranian response if there is a strike. This could include damage to energy facilities, desalination facilities, symbols of government, and American bases under soil. They understand that even a limited response can shake markets, disrupt shipping lanes, and spike the prices. In particular, they fear that the IRGC might try to close the Strait of Hormuz, the bottleneck through which a huge portion of global oil and gas traffic passes. On the other hand, they fear a rapid collapse of the regime in Tehran. They prefer an Iran that is weakened and restrained over regional chaos because that will bring a succession struggle, the unraveling of mechanisms, waves of refugees, and the loss of clear addresses for crisis management. So, last but certainly not least, they feel that if the regime falls and Iran becomes more democratic or more liberal, it will become an inspiration for protests in their own countries. Therefore, they try to mediate, project neutrality, and lower the flames, at least outwardly. Now to Israel, where the question is not only will there be a strike, it's actually what happens the day after the strike. There is a major fear and a really big scenario that everyone in the security establishment knows that the United States will start something in Iran and then lose interest and walk away, leaving Israel and the other regional allies to deal with the aftermath, just like what happened with the United States campaign against the Houthis in Yemen in the spring of last year. That campaign ended with the Houthis promising not to hit any more American targets, but they made no such commitments about not hitting Israeli targets. And Israeli officials say that they do not want to discover too late that Washington has made a similar arrangement with the Ayatollahs after the Iranian system is already bleeding, but its proxies are seeking revenge here in Israel. Therefore, Israel is preparing for the scenario of a surprise war. The Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir, visited the strategic forces at the Nevatim base in the Negev this week, including the F-35 squadrons. Nevatim is also the main hub of aerial intelligence, transport, and refueling capabilities. His message was sharp and quiet, saying that the IDF is prepared for different scenarios and are improving our capabilities all the time. This is our responsibility and our mission. He also emphasized that the Air Force is a strategic arm that is at the forefront of both the offensive and the defensive efforts in near and far arenas, with operational experience accumulated throughout the fighting in recent years, and in almost the recent operations, it had the upper hand. This is the bottom line. Israel is not sitting and waiting. It is preparing an ability to act, and is also signaling that if an intention to harm Israel is identified, it will not wait. And within all of this, the question of the true American objective hovers. Is it an attempt to topple the regime, or only to bend it? There is also discussions about the Americans' ability to find figures inside Iran who would be a real governing alternative. Some raise the possibility of an exiled figure who would serve as a traditional solution, but for now, no significant cracks are being identified in the Iranian establishment. Even reformists are keeping silent, and the regime, experienced in suppressing protests, has so far managed to stop the wave of protests in Iran for now. However, that is exactly the point where everything connects to the scenario of regional escalation. If there is a strike, Iran can choose among several paths: a direct response or a response through the proxies. This would include fire towards American bases and attacks on shipping lanes, activating the Houthis and the Shia militias in Iraq, and hitting up the northern border through Hezbollah. Each such path forces the United States and Israel to hold forces, defense systems, and operational continuity over time. And while the forces are preparing, President Trump continues to project two different narratives at the same time. One narrative says, "We hope we won't act." The second says, "If you try to assassinate me, you will be erased." That language, together with the force deployment on the ground, makes Tehran understand it is in an existential danger. And when a regime feels it is an existential threat, it may choose less rational steps, especially if it wants to be seen as one that does not surrender. The bottom line is that the Middle East is entering a stage where the preparation itself already looks like the opening of a war, and the difference between threat and execution could be one decision in one room. The question now is not only if and when a strike will come on Iran, but who will stay in the arena until the end, and who will get up and leave in the middle of it all when the fire is already here. So the American forces are converging. Iran is threatening to ignite an entire axis, and Israel is preparing for the scenario of a long, multi-front campaign that raises a question that leads to the next report. If the entire region is stretched to the limit, is the IDF already moving to a lightning move in Gaza and Lebanon? And how did the IDF operate with extensive strikes to destroy terrorist infrastructure following Hamas and Hezbollah ceasefire violations? We will bring you all the details soon. But first, I want to remind you to click on the subscribe button so that you stay tuned to the truth in real time and never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. So, our partner for today is Vinya. For many Israelis, it's still about balancing reserve duty, work, and family. You come home, you take off your uniform, and life doesn't slow down. I know that feeling. I've come back from reserves, trying to be present at home, catch up at work, and still feeling completely drained. So as this year begins, I made a New Year's resolution not to do more, but to take better care of my health, so that I can actually show up for the people who depend on me. And that's a decision that any of us can make going into the new year. Vinya is an Israeli supplement made from red grape cells that help support healthy blood flow to the heart, brain, and muscles. For me, that meant better focus, steadier energy, and fewer days of feeling that foggy or burnt out feeling. I started using Vinya during my reserve duty more than 2 years ago, and I'm still taking it today. So if you're thinking about a New Year's resolution that you can actually keep, taking care of your health is a good place to start. You can learn more at vinyatbnisrael.com or call 800-638-1944. Again, that's vinyatbnisrael.com. So let's continue, and now we are switching our focus to the northern arena, because over the last 24 hours, the Air Force opened a wave of strikes in southern Lebanon, and the echoes of explosions were heard also in northern Israel. This is even before the strikes. An evacuation warning in Arabic was issued to the residents in several villages in southern Lebanon, issued by Israel. The IDF emphasizes that steps were taken to reduce the harm to the civilians, including using recession munitions, advance warnings, aerial surveillance, and intelligence. This is again the same method that the terrorist organization Hezbollah embeds terror assets in the heart of the population and tries to use public pressure as a shield. At the same time, the IDF struck 4 border crossings in the El Harmel area in the Syria-Lebanon border. According to the IDF statement, these are crossings used by Hezbollah to smuggle weapons and ammunition. And in the south, the IDF is signaling the same line against Hamas. There is no pause. The forces along the line in the area continue to enforce, identify, and any kind of entrenchment by terror will be struck. And this is including observation posts, ambush cameras, and activity hubs near the line. In the diplomatic arrangements, they do not succeed in dismantling the terrorist organizations. So it looks like Israel will be required to run a broader campaign, including systematic strikes on smuggling chains, destruction of storage sites and underground infrastructure, and the thwarting of field leadership alongside focused ground moves that were needed. And alongside the demilitarization efforts, the question is not only getting the weapons out of them, but the systematic dismantling of the control, the education, and the incitement mechanisms that built the next generation of terror. In one day, the IDF moved from the Syria-Lebanon smuggling axis through Lebanon itself and to continuous enforcements against Hamas, to block rehabilitation and to break the momentum. And that takes us to the next part. What does the peace coalition that President Trump is talking about, how will it look like? Which countries are joining? Why is Russia entering the Gaza picture? And what must happen on the ground so that words, Hamas will be eliminated, become actually a work plan? Before we move to our report about the Peace Council and the statements that will come from there, and before we understand who the participants are, I want to invite you to keep spreading the truth, share, follow us, and make sure to hit that subscribe button. Also, if you're in Jerusalem, leave us a comment, come visit us. Overnight between Wednesday and Thursday, the IDF conducted strikes in Gaza and in southern Lebanon, and on the ground it feels like another round is coming. But overhead in Washington and in Davos, a bigger move is unfolding as President Trump is trying to put a new framework on the Middle East with a clear threat to Hamas, a sharp message to Iran, and one council that is supposed to replace half of the world. This matters now because if Trump is really building a peace council with 59 countries without Europe and with Russia inside, this is not just another statement, but a shift power that could affect everything that's happening in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Iran, and already in the coming weeks this change will happen. So to start, President Trump gave Hamas a deadline, saying that Hamas will be disarmed or will be destroyed, adding that within 2 to 3 weeks, the United States will know whether Hamas is meeting its commitments. And if not, they will disappear very quickly. Behind this threat, another conversation is unfolding inside the Gaza Strip itself, after a Saudi report that senior Hamas leaders in the Gaza Strip are preparing to leave abroad, sparking an uproar. On the ground in Gaza, there is a public living in ruin, looking at its leadership like a mafia. People speak openly about corrupt leaders who abandon them. Some want just one thing, that they leave and never come back. Others are both angry and afraid, because whoever stays behind could still drag them into the next confrontation. A woman named Iman told journalists she hopes Hamas and Islamic Jihad will hand over the weapons and leave through a safe corridor. She also described the reality in which most of the senior and skilled figures were eliminated in the war, but there are still some who can give orders and maintain control. However, according to scattered reports, part of the departure would be voluntarily and under arrangements that are coordinated with the organization's leadership abroad. And at the same time, there is another line. Other leaders, especially at the military level, refuse to leave under any kind of circumstances. Some of the names mentioned as those who might leave are figures who are recently appointed to the political bureau in Gaza as part of the reorganization. There is another version, more tactical, which would see a temporary exit for meetings in Egypt with security officials on critical issues and then a return to the Gaza Strip. Meaning, not everyone is running. Some may be maneuvering. Here, we arrive at the issue of President Trump's proposed peace council. President Trump is trying to build an international framework that starts in Gaza but expands quickly. He has invited 59 leaders and presents it almost as a super body that will oversee the ceasefire in Gaza, the rehabilitation in the Gaza Strip, and also push forward a broader diplomatic track. He himself says out loud that he thinks about the United Nations, that it doesn't help much, doesn't realize its potential, and the new council might replace the United Nations. He brands it as the most prestigious body ever, one that will do a lot of work that the United Nations was supposed to do. So, who has already joined this peace council? Any ideas? Key Middle East states, including Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Egypt, Jordan, and Turkey. Large Muslim majority countries, including Indonesia and Pakistan. And last but not least, Israel. Prime Minister Netanyahu has already announced that he will join this council, and there is even a list of countries outside the region that are ready to join. Trump says that countries not traditionally from the Middle East want to come in as well, and he presents it as a coalition that is ready to eliminate Hamas. But the big story here is who is outside, as Germany, Italy, France, and Britain have declined to join, and the headline is simple: Europe is out. Putin is in. Trump says that Russian President Vladimir Putin agreed to join, but the Kremlin is signaling a wait-and-see approach to see what's happening, and no decision has been made just yet. Moscow is leaving itself room to maneuver, but it is not closing the door. Another part of this story is the price of entry, as President Trump is demanding $1 billion for permanent membership in the council. Putin, according to this version, is willing to pay, but only from funds of Russian assets that were frozen following the war in Ukraine. This is not a technical detail, but an attempt to turn frozen money into a diplomatic tool. Speaking of which, meetings are being planned with American envoys and also possible talks with Abu Mazen, the Palestinian president. This signals that this council, if it is established, will not be only Gaza, it will be able to be more effective, because where money, pressure, and threats are mixed together, you have power. The reason that Trump can allow himself to press like this is that he is working on another arena as well, including Greenland and NATO. He says there is a framework for a future deal on Greenland, and because of it, he also will not impose the tariffs that he planned on European countries that opposed his moves there. Europe wants stability. President Trump offers a framework and at the same time pushes them out of the council and brings Russia inside. Someone looking at this from the side can understand why diplomats describe Trump's invitation as something that feels less like a choice and more like no choice. Inside all of this, the message to Iran is also part of the picture. Trump says simply, Iran will not be able to be nuclear, adding that he hopes that we won't act, but leaves the threat on the table if the Iranians do not stop. He also paints a victory picture, saying Iran was a bully. Now, it is no longer the bully, and ties this to the peace that he claims was born in the Middle East after the destruction of the Iranian nuclear threat. These are the sentences that are meant to broadcast one thing to the world: the United States is running a new order here, and whoever does not enter the track will find himself facing sanctions, pressure, or action. This does not ignore Israel's northern arena either. Regarding Hezbollah, President Trump says there is a problem, but describes it as a small flames. This is language that downplays the threat at a declarative level, but allows him to keep a free hand, because on the ground, where there is a wave of strikes in southern Lebanon, it is no longer a small flame for somebody living here in Israel. So, to sum up, President Trump is now trying to pull power towards himself by setting a deadline for Hamas, establishing a peace council that skips over Europe, courts Russia, and leaves Iran two options: stop or collide. And the real question is, who will break first? Hamas from within, Europe from without, or Iran from the side? We don't know where this is all going. Therefore, we all need to pray for the situation, because this is a spiritual war and we need your help. So let's pray first of all for wisdom to our leaders, to your leaders. They need all the help they can get in this very, very complicated situation. Let's pray for peace and safety to the soldiers that are pouring into the Middle East. Let's pray for the Iranian people that need our prayers more than anybody else. Let's pray for better leadership for them, for freedom, and for our future. And keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.